The cafe was heavy with an unusual tension, not calm, but charged with unease. Every patron lowered their voice instinctively, and even the servers moved with an almost reverent caution, as if daring not to disturb the fragile air. The hum of the espresso machine seemed muted, swallowed by the weight of someone's looming presence. At the table closest to the window sat Richard Carrington, a man whose name alone drew both awe and fear across the city. He was a self-made millionaire, not admired for kindness but dreaded for a temper as sharp as glass and standards that crushed even the most seasoned professionals. His presence felt like a shadow draping over the room, a storm waiting to strike. Tales of his merciless critiques, staff reduced to tears, and public humiliation spread like wildfire. Anyone in the cafe could recount at least one story of a trembling barista fleeing after a single misstep. Every morning he demanded the same ritual, a double espresso, cinnamon added precisely. Yet even the slightest imperfection, a missed angle or a faltering crema, could unleash his wrath. The baristas knew that no error was ever forgiven, no matter how small. One young worker had disappeared from the cafe entirely after a cup had been deemed imperfect. Another had been shamed before all customers simply because the manager had failed to recognize Richard instantly. Fear wasn't just real here, it was suffocating, omnipresent. That day, Richard entered with the flawless posture and immaculate navy suit that seemed to make the air itself stiffen. He didn't greet anyone. Instead, he moved with deliberate authority to his usual table, perfectly placed to oversee everything. A server rushed forward, hands trembling violently, trying to erase every speck of dust, as if that act alone could shield them from his scrutiny. Even the espresso machine seemed to shrink in his presence. The manager, John Miller, hovered behind the counter, cloth in hand, bracing himself for what was inevitable. Every patron pretended to be absorbed in newspapers or screens, but all eyes flicked to the imposing figure. Anxiety was contagious. Any small mistake could trigger the storm that Richard embodied. When the trembling server returned with the coffee, it was almost a miracle it remained upright. Richard's icy stare met the cup, evaluating, dissecting, and judging. The entire cafe held its breath as he raised it for a sip. The faint curl of his lip didn't promise approval. It was the calm before a violent storm. The delicate clink of the cup against the table resonated like a warning. The staff knew instinctively that another tempest was about to erupt. His gaze sharpened, piercing, calculating. He examined the dark espresso, the steam curling with the aroma of cinnamon, yet satisfaction eluded him. Every nerve in the young barista's body tensed. Alex Bennett, 19, had barely been on the job a month. Pale, wide-eyed, fragile under pressure. He clutched the counter, replaying each meticulous step in his head. Water measured precisely, grounds weighed and sifted, temperatures checked repeatedly. All for nothing, it seemed, against the cold scrutiny of a man who demanded perfection. Richard didn't hesitate. With sudden, deliberate force, he sent the cup crashing onto the table. The sound tore through the cafe like a gunshot. "This is unacceptable," he roared, each word charged with authority and cruelty. "Too hot, poorly balanced. Do you think I tolerate mediocrity?" Heads ducked instinctively, and the room froze. Every breath felt borrowed, every movement a potential offense. John Miller stepped forward, attempting calm, though his hands betrayed him, shaking under the weight of inevitability. "We'll remake it immediately, Mr. Carrington," he said, voice quivering, trying to restore order. But Richard's contempt was palpable, his piercing stare squeezing any semblance of courage from the man. "Another cup?" he sneered, voice low and cutting. "How many times must I endure your incompetence before it ends? If leadership failed at its core, I wouldn't waste my time here." Silence fell, thick and oppressive. Even John, experienced and patient, felt the sting of helplessness pressing down, leaving him pale, breath shallow. Richard settled back, his aura of dominance filling every corner of the cafe. One last chance. Perfect, flawless espresso. Every detail unquestionable. Alex trembled behind the counter, hands working mechanically, each movement a desperate plea for mercy. Nearby, Emily Carter, just 20 and barely a week into her role, watched the unfolding injustice, heart tight with a mixture of fear and indignation. Her brown skin shone under the soft lights, eyes blazing with quiet determination. Her posture, calm but alert, hinted at a spirit ready to stand, despite the oppressive weight of Richard Carrington's tyranny. Emily Carter still carried the tray of steaming cappuccinos, but her gaze was locked on Richard, eyes burning with a mix of discomfort and determination. She had grown up in the unforgiving streets of South Chicago, where poverty, injustice, and prejudice were as common as cracked sidewalks. Her mother, Patricia Carter, had fought tirelessly for 20 years, raising her daughter with one unwavering lesson. No one can take your self-respect from you. Not wealth, not power, not cruelty. Respect is your birthright. Those words had woven themselves deep into Emily's spirit, planting a courage that refused to bend. She had always believed that dignity and fairness belonged to every person, regardless of background or status. Yet, watching Alex tremble under Richard's oppressive stare, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead, and John Miller bow in helpless humiliation, a fire ignited inside her. Every nerve in her body coiled with tension, like a bowstring pulled taut. Her heart thundered. She could no longer stand aside in silent submission. But the unspoken rule of this place was clear. No one defied Richard Carrington. To challenge him was to risk everything, your job, your reputation, even your sense of safety. Her colleagues had warned her, whispered frantic advice to stay silent, to bow, to comply. But Emily could not betray the principles her mother had fought to instill. Fear rose in her chest, yet an even stronger force surged forward, a call to justice that overpowered hesitation. In a heartbeat, her decision was made. Setting the tray down on the nearest table, she inhaled sharply, her eyes alight with resolute courage. Every step she took toward Richard Carrington radiated confidence. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. Staff exchanged wide-eyed glances, silently pleading for her to turn back, but she advanced without faltering. Her eyes never left his. And for the first time, the untouchable man behind the power and money would meet a true challenge. Each footfall echoed with purpose across the polished floor, breaking the tense silence like a drumbeat of rebellion. Patrons froze, startled by the audacity of a young black woman walking straight into the lion's den. John Miller opened his mouth, but no sound came. He was powerless, sweat streaking his face, as Emily approached the storm he had long feared. Most. Even whispers faded under Richard's glare, leaving a frozen room awaiting the confrontation. Reaching his table, Emily squared her shoulders. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. You can't control fear, but you can control how you face it. She met his piercing blue eyes without flinching. Richard blinked in surprise, annoyance flickering across his sharp features. Who are you? What do you want? His voice was a thunderclap of arrogance and authority. I'm Emily Carter, she said, her tone calm yet resolute, carrying every ounce of her conviction. I'm a new employee, and I have something to say. Richard chuckled, a sound, dripping with disdain. Leaning back, he planted his hands firmly on the table. Something to say, and you're just a server. Entertaining. Fine. 30 seconds. Emily drew in a steady breath, every word weighted with self-respect and a sense of justice. The way you treat the staff here is unacceptable. No matter who you are, no matter how much money or power you wield, you have no right to demean others. Richard's smirk vanished, replaced by stunned astonishment. In all his life, no one had ever spoken to him so directly, especially not someone in her position. "You're bold," he sneered, voice laced with threat, eyes drilling into her like daggers. "Do you even know who I am? Do you understand the consequences?" Emily stepped forward, unwavering. "I know exactly who you are, but it matters less than the fact that you are trampling people's dignity. Every person here deserves respect. Money does not give you the right to humiliate others." Her words struck through the cafe like lightning, freezing the room in a stunned silence. Richard leapt to his feet, towering over her, fury radiating from every inch of his frame. He slammed a hand on the table, voice rising like a storm. "What did you just say to me? You, a mere server, lecture me on manners?" Emily held her ground, fearless, voice steady, unwavering. "I am not lecturing, Mr. Carrington. I am reminding you that no amount of wealth or power gives you the right to belittle others. Every person here deserves respect, even someone like me, a simple server." Richard drew in a harsh, ragged breath, his gaze burning into Emily as if he could scorch her courage out of existence. Never had anyone dared to meet him without cowering, let alone a young, unassuming server he had barely noticed. In that instant, the cafe seemed to freeze, hearts skipped beats, and the air was taut with suspense. For the first time, Richard Carrington's ironclad authority was directly challenged by someone small yet unyielding, a single voice insisting that dignity could not be bought, borrowed, or bargained away. Richard's shock twisted quickly into a storm of dark fury. In all his life, in all his power and privilege, he had never felt such humiliation, especially not from a young black woman whose very existence he had dismissed as insignificant. His hand clenched the edge of the table until the knuckles whitened, and his jaw tightened as he forced back the torrent of rage. Every lesson of dominance instilled by his cold, unyielding father surged through him, demanding retaliation, demanding submission from the weak. Yet Emily did not flinch. He chose instead a sharper weapon, words wrapped in venom, aiming at her heritage and upbringing. A faint, contemptuous smile curled his lips as his piercing eyes swept over her, drawing a shiver from anyone who dared meet his gaze. "Miss Carter, is it?" he said, voice smooth and lethal. "I've seen people like you before, pretending confidence, masking doubt. I suppose this is your grand attempt to prove you're special." Emily held her silence, recognizing the trap and refusing to be baited into anger. Richard leaned in, silky venom dripping from every word. "I understand, Emily. People in your position often have pitiful circumstances. Your mother probably worked herself to exhaustion, teaching you lofty ideals like fairness and dignity. How noble. But the world isn't kind. Some things will always be beyond your reach, because of who you are and the color of your skin." His words cut through the suffocating stillness like invisible blades. Patrons looked away in shame, or held their breath in fascination, caught between fear and awe at the confrontation. Emily's chest tightened, but her face remained serene, her mind anchoring on her mother's strength, the woman who had given everything to protect and guide her. Richard's attempts to wound her could not touch her true self-worth. She drew herself up and spoke, voice clear, unwavering, locking eyes with him. "Mr. Carrington, I know what you're trying to do, trying to wound me with prejudice and power, but I won't let you insult my mother or my heritage. She worked tirelessly, yes, but she also taught me this: never bow to injustice, never yield to those who crush others." Richard's grip on the table tightened, his face flushed with raw fury, yet Emily pressed on, stronger, louder, every word echoing like a hammer striking steel. "The world isn't always fair, but that doesn't mean we accept cruelty. I am not trying to make myself special. I am doing what anyone decent would do, defending those who are demeaned and oppressed." Her declaration thundered through the cafe, shaking the walls with its clarity. Richard's mask of cold control faltered, the rigid composure he wore for decades cracking under her courage. "I truly pity you, Mr. Carrington," she continued, unwavering. "You've spent your life believing that wealth and power allow you to belittle others. But money cannot buy genuine respect. It never has, and it never will." Richard froze, a man unaccustomed to being challenged, his authority shaken. In that moment, Emily had unmoored his absolute control, and the cafe seemed to hold its breath, watching a quiet revolution unfold. Every eye was fixed on the tense duel between dignity and dominance, a clash of principles, courage, and raw power, played out in the hushed room, every heartbeat magnified. When Richard finally departed, the glass door shutting behind him like the final note of a storm, silence blanketed the cafe. Emily felt the weight of her actions, measured in both admiring and apprehensive glances from co-workers and customers alike. She returned to the counter with calm steps, even as her mind swirled with triumph, fear, and solitude. Some stared with curiosity, some with silent judgment, whispering doubts she couldn't ignore. Who does she think she is? Challenging Richard Carrington? She'll be fired soon, mark my words. Their murmurs scraped at her confidence like jagged knives. Yet Emily maintained her composure, focusing on wiping the counter, grounding herself in deliberate motions to resist the storm of intrusive thoughts. Though isolated, she felt no regret. She had defended not only Alex and John, but the principle her mother had instilled. Respect is earned by honoring others, not demanded through fear. John Miller approached cautiously, concern etched in every line of his face. "Emily, I know you meant well, but you must think twice. Richard Carrington doesn't let things go easily. I'm worried about you." Emily lifted her eyes, calm, steadfast. "I understand, Mr. Miller," she replied evenly. "But I believe I did the right thing." He let out a slow sigh, shook his head, and walked away with that air of dismissive authority. But the invisible wall between Emily and the rest of the cafe grew heavier with each step. No one dared approach her, as if a single word might draw them into the storm she had just faced. The remainder of her shift crawled by. Emily immersed herself in her work, serving each cup with painstaking care, but the air remained thick with quiet tension. Once the last customer had left, she found herself alone among the tables and chairs, her mind a swirl of uneasy thoughts. She thought of her mother, of the countless sacrifices made to shield her from a world eager to demean her. She pictured Patricia's worn hands, still strong from years of toil, and the fire in her spirit that had never allowed insults to take root. That memory steeled Emily, giving her strength to face the isolation and prejudice now pressing down on her. She realized that the real fight wasn't with Richard Carrington, it was with the invisible walls of status, bias, and expectation that separated her from everyone else. Then, cautiously, Alex Bennett approached, the young co-worker she had defended. His eyes were a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "Emily, thank you. I'm sorry you had to hear those things." Emily's lips curved into a gentle, reassuring smile, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to apologize. I spoke up because everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are or the color of their skin." Alex nodded, eyes shining with admiration, and for a brief moment the weight on Emily's shoulders lifted. She understood that even if she faced judgment or isolation, someone recognized the courage behind her actions. When her shift ended, Emily walked home beneath a sunset streaked in fiery reds and golds. The streets she knew so well seemed charged with the weight of her battle. Though the path ahead would be lonely, her determination burned brighter than her fear. Her dignity and self-respect were hers alone, and she would never surrender them. Even if she stood alone against injustice, Emily Carter knew that those who dared to challenge the world's cruelty were the ones who ultimately reshaped it. Meanwhile, high above in a downtown penthouse, Richard Carrington sat alone, the dim glow of the city lights spilling across his expansive living room. A glass of whiskey rested in his hand, its burn doing little to quell the unease in his chest. Normally, each display of power over the vulnerable brought him satisfaction. Tonight, that satisfaction was absent. His gaze drifted to the glittering city below. But inside, he felt hollow, unsettled, and strangely small. Emily's face and words replayed relentlessly in his mind, echoing long after the cafe had emptied. He couldn't understand it. A mere server, a young black woman, had struck a chord he couldn't ignore. He had spent his life controlling, dominating, and humiliating others with his words, yet now her courage unsettled him. Money, influence, and reputation meant nothing against the force of her conviction. A strange, unwelcome feeling, shame, gnawed at him, and he hated it. Every attempt to dismiss her as insignificant faltered under the truth of her presence. Rising to his feet, he stared down at the streets, trying to convince himself she was just an anomaly, a fleeting challenge from an inexperienced girl hardly worth concern. Yet another part of him resisted that lie. Emily had looked him in the eye, unwavering. No one had ever done that. Not ever. He shook his head, trying to dispel the unsettling thoughts, determined not to lose so easily. To reclaim his dominance, he vowed to return tomorrow, to exert pressure, to break her resolve and remind everyone of his authority. The next morning, Richard returned to the cafe, the usual arrogance cloaking him but unable to mask a faint tremor of unease. Each order was delivered with exaggerated scrutiny, each word sharpened to intimidate. But Emily's calm, steady gaze haunted him. Every attempt to berate a server faltered, his voice losing force under the memory of her eyes. The power he had, wielded effortlessly, now felt fragile, uncertain. Every word that once rolled off his tongue freely now weighed heavily, forcing him to confront a truth he had long denied. Emily Carter was a force he could not dominate. Over the next days, the cafe's tension thickened. Richard's visits became more frequent, each time more exacting, his attention unwaveringly fixed on Emily. The staff grew anxious, fearful, hesitant, sensing the calculated pressure meant to force her out. One morning, he stormed in, icy as ever, and made a beeline for his usual table by the window, eyes locked challengingly on Emily. The thud of his leather briefcase against the table echoed like a warning. He snapped his fingers at manager John Miller. "I need to speak with you in private," he barked, his voice carrying for all to hear. "I believe the service here has deteriorated," he said, voice dripping with accusation. "And I know why. It's that employee," he said, nodding toward Emily. "I want her gone. Immediately. Otherwise, I will use every resource at my disposal to shut this place down." The cafe froze. Emily's heart pounded, but she stood, tall, unwavering. John Miller hesitated, glancing at her, then back at Richard. "Mr. Carrington, I don't believe Emily is the problem." "She's a skilled employee," he said cautiously. Richard cut him off sharply. "She disrespected me in front of everyone. Either you fire her or prepare to close this cafe for good." The tension was unbearable. But before anyone could react, a voice rang out, strong and resolute. "Enough, Richard!" Heads turned. Henry Thompson, an elderly man and daily patron, stood tall, unwavering. Richard stiffened. "This isn't your concern," he said sharply. Henry smiled, calm but fierce. "It is my concern. A few years ago, you humiliated me at a company party, and I stayed silent. Today, I refuse to watch you bully an innocent woman. She stood up to your arrogance, and I will stand with her." The words cut through the oppressive silence, and One by one, others began to rise, voicing their support. Mrs. Margaret Collins, firm and steady, spoke next. "I agree. Emily did the right thing. No one should tolerate cruelty in the name of wealth and power." A young man near the window added, "Emily has done nothing wrong. Someone had to speak up. Richard, it's time you were reminded." Richard froze, his face flushing with a mix of shame and simmering anger. For the first time, he faced opposition not from one person, but from a united chorus of voices, strangers who refused to bow to his wealth or fear. His control, the invisible dominance he had wielded for decades, slipped like sand through his fingers. Emily watched, her chest swelling with both relief and gratitude, as the patrons who had quietly observed so long finally rose in defense of fairness and human dignity, the very principles she had lived by. Realizing his influence had crumbled in that room, Richard stormed out without a backward glance. The moment the door swung shut, the cafe erupted, tears, laughter, and applause mingling in joyous celebration. Emily's eyes stung, but she offered a radiant smile to each person who had stood with her. In that instant, she understood she was no longer alone. Courage and justice had triumphed, and from this day forward, no one, not even the most powerful man in the city, could force her to bow. The glass door's click echoed like a final verdict, marking the first time Richard Carrington had retreated, in complete humiliation. Slowly, the suffocating tension melted away, replaced by a lightness the cafe hadn't felt in years. Emily stood, chest rising and falling with pride, as gentle applause and approving glances began circulating toward her. This was not only her victory. It was the triumph of every quiet voice silenced by fear, every person who had endured humiliation at Richard Carrington's hands. Far away, Richard sped through the city streets, knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. His rage unlike anything he had ever known. His heart pounded violently, breaths coming in short, sharp bursts. In years of wielding power and instilling fear, he had never felt so powerless. Later, in the cold stillness of his penthouse, he shrugged off his coat and slumped onto the leather sofa, staring blankly at the walls around him. The man who had always stood at the peak of influence now felt defeated, not by money, not by rivals, but by the courage of one determined young woman. Memories of Emily's defiance and the customer's unwavering support replayed in his mind. Impossible to silence. He realized that his wealth and arrogance had erected walls between him and the world. People feared him, but they did not respect or care for him. Rising slowly, he walked to the window, gazing down at the twinkling city below. For the first time, he truly understood what he had lost. Genuine connection, loyalty, and respect. Things that could not be bought or coerced. Meanwhile, the cafe blossomed with renewed warmth and ease. Staff no longer stiffened as the door opened. Customers laughed and chatted freely, something rare in Richard's looming presence. Yet, paradoxically, he kept returning, each visit marked by a gentler air. The arrogance that once preceded him was gone, replaced by a quiet attentiveness. He observed Emily closely, noting her grace, her calm composure, the way she served with unwavering care. Slowly, admiration and a trace of wonder began to stir in him. Emily, the petite young woman he had once dismissed, now held his attention not through wealth or power, but through strength, sincerity, and an unshakable dignity. One morning, as she placed his espresso before him, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "Thank you, Emily." Surprised, she met his eyes and smiled politely. "You're welcome, Mr. Carrington." That simple exchange, brief as it was, filled him with an ease he had never known. A single, sincere acknowledgement, he realized, could carry more weight than all his wealth. From that day forward, Richard no longer sought to make Emily's life, or anyone else's difficult. His stern exterior remained, but the tension lifted, allowing those around him to breathe. Slowly, the fear that had once defined him began to dissolve. He learned in quiet increments that arrogance and cruelty only deepened isolation. Emily's courage had opened a door he had never dared approach, the door to genuine respect, empathy, and humanity. Bit by bit, Richard Carrington transformed. He became a calm, attentive presence in the cafe, no longer a terrifying figure of dominance, but a man beginning to understand humility. Emily, for her part, continued her work with unwavering dedication and the same bright, humble spirit. She greeted every morning with a smile, offered joy in her simple gestures, and never sought recognition. Her actions were never for applause, but for what was right. Her bravery, however, could not remain contained. Emily became a quiet symbol of courage and integrity, her story whispered among patrons and shared among colleagues. Day by day, the cafe became a place where respect and dignity thrived, where Emily's presence inspired others to believe in goodness, even amid life's hardships. One morning, as she wiped down the tables, she noticed Richard observing her, not with judgment, but with curious admiration, a small, undeniable testament to the lasting impact of standing up for what is right. Emily didn't flinch. She met his gaze with a gentle smile and a polite nod before returning to her work. Richard paused, caught by the sincerity in her eyes, and offered a small, almost bashful tilt of his head in return. The gesture was brief, yet it carried weight. A quiet acknowledgement from a man who had once dismissed the world, now learning to respect someone whose strength wasn't measured by wealth or status. From that day forward, he began noticing the subtle ways Emily carried herself, the way she quietly guided Alex when he stumbled, how she comforted an elderly patron with tender patience, how she remained composed during the morning rush. Each small, thoughtful act chipped away at his old perceptions, reshaping not just how he saw Emily, but how he saw humanity itself. One afternoon, as Emily prepared to leave, Richard called her over. His eyes held an unexpected earnestness. "Emily, may I ask you something?" Startled, she nodded respectfully. "Of course, Mr. Carrington." He hesitated, a vulnerability on his face rarely, if ever, seen before. How are you so strong?" "I don't understand." Emily regarded him calmly, her voice soft but steady. "Maybe it's because of my mother. She taught me that true strength isn't in wealth or power. It's in holding on to your dignity and treating others with respect, no matter how hard life gets." Richard fell silent, letting her words sink in. In that quiet moment, admiration took root where arrogance had long stood. He realized that all his money, power, and status had never brought him peace, only fear and isolation. From then on, Richard's attention shifted from superficial dominance to genuine observation. He listened when Emily spoke, even briefly, and began to treasure her insights, small yet profound, lessons unavailable in any boardroom or business deal. The staff noticed the change, too. The once intimidating presence of Richard Carrington softened. Apprehension turned into ease, and their respect for Emily grew even deeper. Without intending to, Emily had become a symbol, a beacon of courage, integrity, and self-respect that could challenge even the city's most powerful man. For the first time, Richard bowed, not out of fear or obligation, but to the quiet strength of another human being. Later, as the afternoon sunlight painted the streets golden, Richard overheard Emily speaking with Mrs. Margaret Collins, a regular who had once defended her. Hidden behind a pillar, he listened, captivated by the story of Emily's mother, Patricia Carter, a woman who had raised her daughter through grueling days and endless sacrifice, yet never lost her dignity. She always told me, Emily said softly, that no matter how poor we were, we must never lose our self-respect. People may look down on you, but you must never bow. Richard felt a pang deep within, a shame that cut through his years of indifference. Memories of employees humiliated by his words and actions flashed before him. He had been complicit in, perpetuating the very injustices Emily described. That evening in his penthouse, Richard sat in darkness, no whiskey in hand, confronting himself for the first time. He saw clearly that his pride and coldness had kept him isolated, that his wealth and status were hollow without respect or empathy. Emily's steadfast dignity replayed endlessly in his mind, a stark, humane reminder of all he had lost and could never reclaim through money alone. He remembered her fearless gaze, the moment she had dared to speak truths no one else would. And he understood that courage and sincerity wielded a power no wealth could match. In the days that followed, Richard continued visiting the cafe, but differently, humbly, thoughtfully, never flaunting power. His respect for Emily grew with each passing observation, and at times he found himself quietly admiring her from afar, marveling at how someone so small could embody such unyielding strength. One morning, as she placed his espresso before him, he finally spoke. "Thank you, Emily. I really admire you." Surprised, she met his gaze and smiled. "And I thank you, Mr. Carrington. Your presence here and your gentler manner mean so much to everyone." A gentle warmth filled him, a joy he had long forgotten, a sense that the past could not be undone, but the future could be rewritten, starting now. Richard resolved then to be different. No longer the man people feared, he would listen, empathize, and honor the dignity of others, a transformation sparked entirely by Emily's courage and sincerity. Reflections on his past misdeeds became unbearable, and each morning at the cafe reminded him of the quiet, persistent change taking place within himself, impossible to ignore. One day, as light filtered through the windows, Richard approached the counter where Alex was preparing coffee. Alex froze, fear and uncertainty written on his face. Richard took a deep breath and spoke gently. "Alex, may I speak with you for a moment?" Alex blinked, hesitant, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Mr. Carrington." In a warm, sincere tone, Richard continued. "I want to apologize for the hurtful words and actions I directed at you in the past. I know they caused pain, and I am truly sorry." The cafe seemed to hold its breath. Alex's eyes widened, emotion and disbelief mixing across his face. "Sir, I don't know what to say, but thank you." Richard rested a hand on Alex's shoulder, a gesture of genuine humility. "No, Alex. I should be thanking you for your patience and kindness. I hope you can forgive me." Alex smiled, a relief and joy radiating from him. "I forgive you." "Mr. Carrington, thank you for saying it." But Richard wasn't done. He turned toward Emily, standing poised at a table, serving customers, the entire cafe now watching. "Emily," he said, voice steady and heartfelt, "I treated you unfairly and without respect, and that was wrong. I apologize for the insults and the harm I caused to your dignity." Emily looked at him, her eyes soft and full of understanding. "I forgave you long ago, Mr. Carrington. Thank you for this moment." The cafe fell into reverent silence, listening to the man who had once ruled through fear now speak with honesty and humility, a change born entirely from the courage of a young woman who refused to bow.